I started playing Street Fighter V last year, and I chose Gill because he looked cool and let me do cool combos. I managed to climb out of bronze rank and into silver with him over the course of about 400 games. I am not an expert, but I think I understand enough about SF5's systems to have an informed opinion on Gill. Gill is bad in SF5, but what makes him interesting is how and why he's bad. It isn't a simple case of him not functioning or not having access to certain tools, although he does lack one system mechanic which does harm him. Gill actually has ways to interact at specific points in SF5's mechanics that many characters don't, but each of his tools has its own drawbacks. In particular, I think comparing Gill to a higher tier character like Poison, who has many of the same strengths, can shed a bit of light on what characters are allowed to do in SF5. I know, SF5. It'll be fun, I promise. Most of you probably play Guilty Gear, so I'll briefly describe SF5 and Gill. SF5 is a 6-button fighting game focused on ground control and footsies. Characters have the standard meter, which can be spent on EX moves or supers, as well as the V meter, which can be spent on defensive mechanics like V-shift or V-reversal, and aggressive mechanics like V-trigger. You gain V meter by taking damage and using your character's V skill. Each character has a V skill, which is a unique action that does not have the same restrictions and conventions as a special move. Every character can choose from 2 V skills and 2 V triggers, although when the game launched, each character only had access to 1 of each. The addition of new V skills and triggers is important to understand how the game has evolved. More on that later. Gill was added in the Champion Edition update at the end of 2020 and is the boss character of Street Fighter III who can control fire and ice. Gill's unique character mechanic is Retribution. With the exception of his knee drop, all his special moves and heavy attacks have either a fire or ice attribute. His EX and V-trigger enhanced special moves apply elemental debuffs to his opponent. Hit an opponent with the opposite element and you'll trigger a Retribution. The elemental debuff ends if Gill is hit, and fire ends eventually after doing a truly pitiful amount of gray life. Ice stays as long as Gill doesn't get hit and freezes the victim's stun bar, which generally makes it better, but the debuff element affects which poke or projectile Gill wants to use. This isn't necessarily bad, but it does make Gill a bit more predictable in my experience. Retributions do more damage and build more meter than usual hits, but most importantly they enable combos by giving Gill a free juggle state or lots of hit stun. Juggles in Street Fighter are generally restrictive, so having the chance to do a poke, get a retribution, and start a combo with a big launcher is very powerful. Before we get into the meat of things and I spend the next however long telling you why Gill is bad, let me be clear about this. Gill's damage and stun output are absolutely insane with retributions. His meterless damage output is way above par when he has a retribution chance, and it is genuinely a very strong part of the character. His win condition is definitely powerful enough. It's also just a lot of fun to manhandle people with these giant explosive combos. Gill is absolutely one of the most fun characters in SF5. So, Gill murders people when he gets the chance to combo them with a retribution. How to get the chance for a combo? I think there are 2 main ways, zoning and the strike throw mix-up. This may seem elementary if you play Street Fighter, but I want to describe these briefly for all my Guilty Gear viewers. You can actually win an entire round of Street Fighter without ever doing a single degenerate mix-up or pressure sequence. The damage off of random hits is genuinely high enough that you can just win neutral with single hits and short combos and still reduce your opponent's life to 0. Sometimes your reward for winning neutral is just damage and no okizeme or pressure. I know, it's crazy, but that's Street Fighter. Because characters generally don't have good movement in Street Fighter, projectiles are a very strong way to control the ground. The universal answer to a projectile is to jump over it predictively. Guess right and you get a giant jump-in combo. Shotos and projectile zoners generally have a way to punish an opponent for jumping mindlessly or jumping too late. Most have uppercut attacks that are flagged to be invulnerable to air attacks. Gill's projectiles are pyrokinesis and cryokinesis, which each have different angles and speeds to make jumping over them more ambiguous. In exchange, they have more recovery than a standard Shoto projectile, and Gill lacks a true answer to deep jump-ins that do get past one of his projectiles. That said, Gill's primary anti-airs are all combo starters, so his anti-air damage is much higher than average. However, having that potential doesn't mean anything if you can't actually hit your opponent. Gill's primary anti-airs are 2 HP and 4 HK, the fastest of which is 7 frames. Their hitboxes are also pretty underwhelming compared to some of the game's better anti-air normals. I should note that Gill's V-skill parry does help here, but that has its own risks for other reasons. More on that later. In theory, this gives him good control of his screen. He can place projectiles in spots that are annoying to jump past and annoying to walk under, and if Gill's opponent plays too passively, then Gill can set up cryokinesis and dash after it to approach. In practice, a lot of these anti-air angles are not as reliable as you'd like, and not as hard to walk under as you'd like. For reference, Ken's Hadoken has slightly less recovery than Gill's, and Ken is an aggressive Shoto who gets good damage and Oki from his usual starters. It's also worth noting that many characters have big, obvious answers to projectile moves that make zoning not truly reliable. This is an intentional design point in SF5. When zoning doesn't cut it, you can pressure your opponent with the default mix-up in SF5, Strike Throw. Throws have 5 frames of startup, and there are, I believe, 2 frames of throw invulnerability after exiting block stun or hit stun or waking up. This means that if you are +2 inside of throw range, you can buffer an immediate throw and there will be a 3-frame gap. Because throws are prioritized over normals and the fastest normals in SF5 are 3 frames, your opponent cannot interrupt you by mashing a normal. Instead, he must jump, backdash, or do something invulnerable to throws to beat you. Each of these carries its own risks. Your opponent can also choose to take the throw, because there are no characters who can reliably get a true strike throw mix-up after landing a throw. Throws are hard to defend against consistently, but they generally signify the end of the character's pressure. Cashing out, so to speak. There are many characters who can continue pressure after a throw, but going from one throw directly into another is never truly airtight. Thus, we can look at being +2 or slightly better inside of throw range as the default mix-up point from which our decisions branch out. Against characters whose fastest normal attacks are 4 frames, this window widens to include being +1 inside throw range. Gill's normals are actually pretty decent for forcing a throw, since he has 2 light normals that are plus enough to force a throw mix-up and which leave him inside throw range even if they aren't done from point blank. 2 LP also works against characters without 3-frame normals. Gill can even throw after his 2 LK, although I don't know why he'd want to. Not all SF5 characters have this flexibility, even close-range aggressive fighters. Gill also has 5 MP, which is +3 and leaves him inside throw range, and frame traps into itself for a 4-frame gap. Again, pretty decent. One point I should have clarified is that there are lots of situations in Street Fighter V where you can throw your opponent only if he decides to mash. Gill's light normals are nice because you're close enough to throw even if your opponent decides not to mash. His medium normal lets you be close enough to throw only if your opponent decides to mash. For young Zeku and old Zeku, they each have 1 light normal that lets them throw if their opponent decides not to mash, and all of their light normals will work if their opponent decides to mash. Just wanted to clarify that. It's kind of a wonky situation, but the game is built around that. But the point of a throw is not just to land the throw. You want to use the throw's strength to make your opponent afraid of being thrown and then prey upon that fear. Your opponent isn't a robot with a random number generator. If you throw him 5 times in a row, he'll start trying to break them. If all you'd ever do is strike, he'll just block. The idea of threatening with ambiguity is at the heart of pressure in every fighting game. In an air dasher, Gatling trees make creating ambiguous block strings very easy to do from fast buttons, but SF5 has much stricter rules for extending pressure. Ideally, you want to be +2 or better inside throw range, be able to throw or frame trap into a medium button. Medium normals beat light normals, and 3-frame normals are all lights. Continue to be plus so you can encourage your opponent to sit still. Use this general ambiguity to walk up and reset pressure or threaten a throw. Gill can't really do this. The only way he can beat a 3-frame normal without trading with it is throw, ends pressure and gives really bad Oki, more on that later, or a +3 button into 2 MP, which is negative on block and ends pressure unless your opponent has never played the matchup before. You can special cancel 2 MP into a projectile, but doing it at close range is heavily minus, pyrokinesis or interruptible, cryokinesis. EX pyrokinesis is +1, but the pushback means that Gill's pressure is also generally cut short. I'm being a little bit dishonest here since this particular corner situation lets Gill beat mashing and reset his pressure well, but he's so far outside of throw range that his opponent has little reason to mash. But obviously you don't want a character to have good neutral and long pressure and extreme damage and frightening mix-ups. Characters should have weaknesses. It would not make sense for Gill to have everything. But Gill doesn't have everything. He mostly has big damage, but lots of other characters have big damage or can choose to have big damage by spending meter. He has some flexibility in doing combos thanks to retribution, but other characters can do a lot of things he can't. In exchange for Gill's retribution system, he doesn't have crush counters, an otherwise universal system mechanic. I think the lack of crush counters and his other weaknesses compound to give Gill a lot of poor matchups, which results in him being a very unstable and somewhat low-tier character. There are a few hard weaknesses Gill has that are unique to him due to his mechanics. First is lack of crush counters. Each character in SF5 other than Gill has at least one normal that is a crush counter. If you counter hit with it, you get this special spin animation, get huge frame advantage, and build V-meter. Almost all characters can crush counter with sweep, which forces a hard knockdown. This is especially valuable because hard knockdowns are hard to come by in SF5. They last for a small eternity and give you tons of corner carry and frame advantage. Not having access to crush counters means Gill has no easy I win neutral if this connects buttons. Gill has no hard knockdown from sweep without retribution, which means worse Oki in general from an unsafe button. Almost every character can get a hard knockdown by guessing right with sweep in neutral, but Gill cannot. Having a 3-frame normal is considered a defensive option in SF5. Gill does have one, as well as some other decent defensive options, but it's quite poor. First, the range of Gill's 2LP is tiny, and it can only combo into itself on normal hit. Counter hit gives a more damaging combo, but still no Oki. Gill can't ever get Oki from this button unless his opponent is already cornered or almost cornered. Gill relies very heavily on retributions to make his combos better, but he doesn't have a way to apply the elemental debuffs unless he spends EX meter or activates V-trigger. Technically, his Meteor V-skill applies the debuff, but it's garbage. Meteor can't be cancelled into, ever. It is purely used in neutral. Doesn't appear from Gill outward, so it doesn't cover him like Guile V-skill 1. Is a projectile, so he can't store it like Sagat's V-skills. Cannot be on the screen with one of Gill's other projectiles unless he's in V-trigger. EX Tackle is more reliable but doesn't give Oki without the corner. EX Fireball doesn't allow a combo afterwards without V-trigger activation or very specific spacing in the corner. While no character can force a strike throw mix-up after a throw, many characters get to meaty with good menacing buttons after a throw. This gives them a good ambiguity point for continued pressure even if it's technically fake. Gill's only meaty option after a throw is 6HK, which can simply be beaten by blocking. It is also V-shift fodder. I've had some success with doing throw into dash throw, but that's extremely fake and likely won't work against anyone who knows how to play SF5. Here's a great example I found while recording footage. Dictator's backdash is so good that even if Gill hard reads it with a double forward dash and pushes his 3-frame normal and gets a counter hit, he's too far away to combo into his 5LP 5MP target combo. Gill can't just spend meter to make combos better or more flexible unless he already has a good starter like 2 HP. This is a bit vague, so let's use a direct comparison to Poison here in a situation that I personally encountered against a friend of mine who plays Rose. Punishing an unsafe normal. Here are the meterless combos. And here are the metered combos. As you can see, Poison gets good Oki and damage no matter which option she chooses, and she can spend meter on other combo tools if she wants to. And by good Oki, I mean forcing a throw against characters with 3-frame normals. Gill either chooses between applying the elemental debuff or getting damage and Oki. In situations where most other characters could do something simple and good for a better result, Gill either doesn't have that option or depends on a secondary factor like screen position. To put it more succinctly, most characters can spend meter to do more damage. Gill spends meter to go back to neutral, win neutral without getting hit, and then do more damage. Both of these characters have more versatile options when they have V-trigger active or activated in the combo, but that's kind of the point. SF5 has its own collection of good things to do, and the best characters can do all of them with relative ease. Gill is not like that. The elemental debuff disappears if Gill's hit, so not being able to beat a 3-frame and continue pressure hurts him a lot. Some characters can trade in their pressure and still come out fine, but Gill simply cannot afford to do this. This means his biggest ambiguity point is doing a +3 move into throw or 2MP, which naturally makes his pressure a lot less scary. He has a better time versus 4-frame characters, but it's still not great. And if your opponent chooses to block, your turn will concretely end unless you spend meter. Mid-screen, Gill's only ground combo ender that gives Oki is heavy tackle because his other tackles give no Oki on back rise, although they all give Oki in the corner. Even after this H tackle, Gill can't truly force a strike throw mix-up. Anything that uses a 2 HP launcher can give good Oki, but that's kind of a given since 2 HP is such a great attack in the first place, and you can't easily combo into it without spending some kind of resource or getting a counter hit. Gill's V-trigger activations aren't nearly as mindless as some characters. Personally, I think that V-trigger activations in a vacuum are one of the best designed mechanics in SF5. You can freeze the screen, make unsafe moves safe, or plus, get a big combo from a light or medium normal, and so on. This versatility is one of the most fun things about SF5, and if your opponent does something to make you squander your V-trigger, then it feels like a little mental war is happening between the two of you. Sadly, many characters have totally brainless V-trigger activations that launch them forward with a move that is hard to punish properly and lets them run free pressure while powering up into their V-trigger state. The most fearsome thing Gill can do is 6HK into V-trigger activation, which is plus 12, but not very frightening. Street Fighter in general, and SF5 in particular, emphasize using cross-up jump normals to add to your opponent's mental stack. Anti-airing a cross-up jump isn't as easy as it might seem, and some characters have certain anti-airs hard-coded not to hit behind them. Some characters have medium or heavy kick cross-ups, but Gill only has JLK. This isn't odd, but his jump arc is small and he doesn't have any way to stall in the air or alter his jump arc, so actually using this normal as a cross-up is difficult, at least in my experience. Many of the stronger characters in SF5 are able to build V-meter without taking a big risk or by using their V skills in combos. Gill cannot do this, which ties into his poor V system selection. The one place Gill can build a ton of meter fairly safely is by parrying fireballs, but he's not alone in that. Surely it's better to hit your opponent if you know he's going to throw a fireball instead of parrying it. Many of the characters with versatile V systems in SF5 are actually the ones that were in the game at launch. This is because they were designed to function completely with one V skill and one V trigger, and not developed with the consideration of V shift as a defensive mechanic. When all the new V mechanics were added, these characters got richer, so to speak. Characters like Seth and Gill were designed with multiple V skills and V triggers in mind, as were all of the Season 5 characters. So you have the launch roster and the first couple seasons worth of characters who were designed to be fully functional, and then had new tools given to them. Gill is a character with, in theory, a much more thoughtful V system that has a lot more nuance to it, but is overall weaker. Sadly, his Meteor V skill is garbage, as mentioned earlier. On the other hand, Gill's Parry V skill is super valuable and may as well be part of his character. It has 2 frames of startup and a big active window. It helps anti-air, especially cross-ups, though it isn't bulletproof since it doesn't autocorrect all the time. It's great for winning fireball wars. It can interrupt 2-frame gaps without spending meter and with full combo freedom. This gives him bizarrely good defense against certain mid-dispensers like Honda. In the right context, it's like having access to a V-shift that builds V-meter, but then again, V-shifts at least move you backwards if you guess wrong. V-shifts also don't require you to memorize a spreadsheet of matchup options and take huge risks to interrupt 2-frame gaps and then do specific combos depending on spacing, resources, and so on. I wasn't sure where else to put this, but Gill actually has surprisingly good defensive options for a character with his damage output and screen control. V-skill 2 parry is good, as mentioned earlier. 3-frame normal. Many characters don't have one at all. Simply interrupting a 3-frame gap can be good enough to downgrade frightening pressure situations. EX Tackle is armored on frame 3 and can hit as fast as frame 12, which is decent when you need something like that. He also has an invincible super, a V reversal that knocks down, and the usual system mechanics. These options are collectively pretty good. For comparison, Poison only has a 3-frame normal outside of system mechanics. Gill can theoretically challenge a block string, apply an elemental debuff, and then do a giant combo if his opponent guesses wrong, but this is such a huge ask. EX Tackle resets to neutral if you don't have your opponent cornered. Your opponent succeeds on trading with a mash, unlike many other characters. Gill must then dump resources into the combo, which is difficult if he doesn't have V-trigger, though this is ultimately a minor drawback considering how fast characters can build meter and how much meter Gill gets for a retribution. Gill's normals are simultaneously well designed and pretty bad. Most of them can be used in at least 2 ways, which is good, but they lack the kind of generic power that many other characters have. His light normals and medium punches are fine, as mentioned earlier, but his other normals are notably worse. 5MK is minus on hit and can't be special cancelled. Poison 5MK controls a similar range and can be. Why? Don't tell me it's because Poison is a zoner and Gill isn't. 2MK is minus on hit, but you can special cancel it. The tackle is awkward since that move is unsafe on block and doesn't give any Oki outside the corner. Then again, I'm really bad at single hit confirms, so perhaps you simply meant to single hit confirm into tackle at far range. The frame advantage on 2MK is even worse if Gill does the 2LK 2MK target combo, which doesn't have any cancel options except for V-trigger activation or V-trigger attacks. Oh, poison 2MK? You can link from it on normal hit. 5HK is pretty solid for normal of its size, but sadly whiffs on crouchers and is unrewarding without V-trigger activation or retribution. 5HP is mostly combo fodder, I think. I've seen some people use it to whiff punish moves since it combos into heavy tackle as a special cancel, but the slow startup and large hurt blocks make it a poor footsies button. Notably safe on block at -2 though. This 2-in-1 philosophy also extends to his tackle special move. It's mostly a combo tool, but since it has such long range and is only -6, the light version can be somewhat reliably spaced as a big poke. Gill gets no Oki mid-screen, of course, but it makes you feel smart for doing it right. I made one comparison to Poison earlier, but I'd like to go into a bit more detail this time and really hammer home how much better she is than Gill. I think the similarities between the two characters lend themselves to this kind of measurement. Poison is a limb zoner who uses her whip stance to annoy and zone people at long range. She has the same ways to get combos as Gill, anti-airs or strike throw pressure, but her kit is almost all better than Gill's. While Poison lacks Gill's parry and armored tackle, she does have a 3-frame normal that is much better. In fairness, this normal is the only non-system mechanic defensive option Poison has, but I still think it's a bit lopsided compared to Gill. Her whip stance has 3 angles, but unlike Gill's, the anti-air one will rarely miss unless your opponent jumps clear past you. The EX versions of this move are also flexible. Low version is a combo tool because it juggles into her launcher kick. Mid version is a block string tool because it vacuums and is plus on block, for some reason. Upwards version is a huge anti-air that will beat basically all of the game's usual air stall moves and vacuum Poison's opponent for pressure. Poison can also do 5 HP into stance cancel to add more damage to a combo without spending EX meter or V meter. Poison's flip kick is a high profile and anti-fireball tool like Gill's knee drop, and the EX version is a pretty fast, very far overhead. It's only punishable by light normals for almost all the cast, and on hit it either gives plus frames, a combo, or a knockdown. Poison's launcher kick is a combo tool, as I mentioned earlier, but the light version can combo from her 3-frame normal, which means she gets good Oki and corner carry from her 3-frame. Launcher kick is also a good disjointed anti-air, which can be cross-cut to autocorrect against ambiguous cross-ups. The EX version can cancel into her V skills, which lets her build V meter while doing damage. Gill can't do that, as mentioned earlier. Just to be clear, Poison has really good Oki compared to Gill, even in spots where you'd think a zoner wouldn't be allowed to. Her forward throw in particular is really nice because it leaves her opponents so close. Poison's frame traps into the strike throw mix-up are also better than Gill's, in my opinion. She can do a true tick throw from either 5 LP or 2 LP, and after 2 LP she can beat mashing with 5 MP, which is plus on block, and frame traps into itself or something else. There are just more points where Poison can continue to threaten with strikes, which means there are more points where her opponent's respect can be cashed in for a throw or pressure reset. Poison's V-system selections are also limited like Gill's, but that's because her swing V skill does almost nothing for her, and her whip V-trigger is extremely niche compared to her Molotov V-trigger. The swing V skill only combos from a specific distance where she can already do forward jump J6 HP for the same effect. The Whip V-trigger has about the same damage combos as Molotov V-trigger, but can't be used to extend block strings or control the screen. It can combo from her long-range whip moves where Molotov can't, but that's a pretty narrow thing since Molotov combos at closer range is just the same. Poison also has access to very high damage with her Molotov combos, but she doesn't need those combos or the V-trigger activation nearly as much as Gill does. This affords her more flexibility in any given matchup, since she doesn't lose as much comeback robbery potential when doing a V-reversal or V-shift. As mentioned before, Poison can link off her 2MK without spending meter. Why? I'm even less knowledgeable about Poison than I am about Gill, but in my experience, she's a better, more stable character, aside from Gill's very situational defensive options. Changes I'd like to see for Gill are in 2 camps: quality of life stuff and actual buffs. These don't all need to happen, but given that the last balance patch of SFI's lifetime is coming in March, I think it's important to throw some stuff at the wall. One common change that people suggest for Gill is for him to apply the elemental debuff on heavy normal counter hits. I think this is a fine idea, but it doesn't need to be the only thing he gets. I do want Gill to keep his identity as a character with poor neutral who gets giant, crazy combos when he hits you. It's better for a character to be weak and interesting than strong and boring. Applying elemental debuffs on counter hit would mean he has an easier time getting his win condition going. But if Capcom thinks he should be more threatening once it is going, that's okay. Of course, Capcom seems to think Gill is fine just the way he is, which I don't agree with. I think it'd be fine for his throw to continue giving mediocre Oki if he can more frequently and reliably force the strike throw mix-up. His neutral is also pretty good when he has the Fire V trigger active, so that's filling its intended purpose. No changes necessary to the Fire V trigger. The elemental buff should be more durable. Perhaps similar to G's levels and Alex's V skill too, Gill should need to get knocked down for it to go away. This would make it a minor exception to the other fire and ice character mechanics, but who cares? Give Gill some way to cancel or combo into his meteor, or make it faster, or let him have it up at the same time as a projectile, or all of the above. It's just not usable right now. In a patch last year, the meteor got a whole 2 frames faster startup. It's a joke, especially compared to characters like Nash or Jury who can reliably power themselves up in their B&B combos. Give his EX tackle the same distance and or Oki as his heavy tackle, so that spending a resource at least lets him force a strike throw mix-up. Does that sound crazy? I don't think so, especially compared to garbage like Urian's Aegis Reflector, which lets him force several mix-ups between a comboable throw and comboable overheads. Gill's anti-airs should have better hitboxes, particularly the medium projectile angle and his anti-air normals. It's fine for these moves to be specific and not cover large sections of Gill's body, but they shouldn't trade or lose so often when he does use them correctly. I also believe the air crushing flag should start frame 1 on his knee drop. Spending meter on a hard-coded anti-air is something that almost no other SF5 character needs to do. Parry should autocorrect Gill during the startup of whatever move he does after it. Getting a sick parry for a cross-up anti-air and whiffing your combo starter is one of the most downright miserable things I've ever felt. Gill's 3-frame normal should be able to combo to other light normals on normal hit. Right now it's just 1 frame too bad for that. This would mostly mean he could get the 5LP 5MP tackle combo from his 3-frame, which I think would be fine since he still wouldn't get mid-screen Oki. I'm fine with 2LP continuing to be tiny, but at least make the reward better. I believe Gill should also have less recovery on his fireballs, since he doesn't have a hard-coded anti-air. 4 to 8 frames would give him less recovery than a Shoto, but still more than a zoner like Guile. I think Gill should have better frame data on his medium kick normals. At least make them not outright unsafe on block or hit. Gill's Ice V-Trigger has some strong utility when he has his opponent cornered, but it's considerably worse than a Fire V-Trigger the rest of the time. The addition of the V-Shift mechanic has also made the Ice Trap mix-ups a lot weaker. Weakening big, obvious attacks is part of what V-Shift is supposed to do, but I think Gill should be at least a little better against it. Maybe if the Ice Trap had manual detonation or some kind of tracking. Too much? Maybe. Perhaps give Gill's forward and back throws different elements, so they can apply the debuff and pop retribution? This might be a bit too much if other buffs were included, but I think it'd be cool if both Gill and Urian could combo off of throw in different ways. Gill's moves work the way they do because they're meant to be like Urian's, but not require a charge since he's more powerful. Honestly, there's a lot Urian can do that Gill can't, which makes me sad since I think Urian is super boring. But that's another topic. Thanks for watching this, especially if you're a Guilty Gear player with little interest in SF5. I think the game's fun as a side game or if you're using low tiers, but the stronger characters are just so snooze-inducing that I can't fathom what it must be like to play against them all the time. I like using SF5 as a break when I get tired of Plus R's mountains of garbage, and to remind myself there are winners and losers on every fighting game roster. I don't know that I'd recommend SF5, but I spent 4 straight years justifiably hating on it, so if I can have fun with it, then I'm sure you can too. More Guilty Gear content coming when it's ready. I know people have been asking for character analysis on some of Exerd's high tiers, and I do have a video series planned for that. I'm also working on a very exciting project with another video maker, but I can't go into any more detail than that. Good stuff's coming. Eventually. In the meantime, feel free to subscribe and let me know how you liked this video. Take care.